welcome back to the Faith and Culture Bible Commentary Series. I'm Kathryn Camp. We just finished the book of Amos, and God has led me to dive into the book of Joel. Now, we are going to look at the writings of this prophet and learn a little bit about his background, and then we will start reading the chapters. So, who was Joel the prophet? Joel is one of the 12 minor prophets that warned God's people of what was to come if they did not change their ways. That's what they were all assigned to do. Minor prophets are known as minor only because their writings are not as extensive as the writings of the major prophets, whose written works are much lengthier. They are not considered minor due to the importance or lack thereof of their message to the people. God works in the same way today. Some people have huge and long-term roles in ministry that become noticed to the public at large, and others have ministries that do not get noticed by large crowds, yet their part in God's kingdom is just as impactful and important. And I'm thinking right now of missionaries. Those missionaries who go over to very dangerous territories to spread the gospel, and they never really get noticed except by those who help fund them. But their mission and their ministry is just as important as some famous pastor with several thousand or tens of thousands of viewers or attendees. The prophet Joel's ministry was focused on warning the people of Jerusalem about the coming judgment if the people did not repent. Well, based on the way that the warnings are presented, Joel's message was meant for a time of tribulation that was near for the people of God, as well as for a time in the future that was directed at the nations of the world. He was also called to give hope to those who would suffer during the judgment period. God is very merciful, and for those who are paying attention, for those who have been doing their best to reach out to Him, to study the scriptures, or in their case, in antiquity, not everybody was privileged to have a scroll. In fact, those were held by the religious leaders of the day. They would attend the temple and go listen to the scriptures. And they had been told about these stories about Moses and about other writings about their history all their life, if they were raised properly. And when I say properly, God commanded in Deuteronomy 6, said, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord your God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your might. And you shall likewise teach these to your children when you wake up, when you walk by the way, when you sit down." In other words, all day long, Jewish people were supposed to be teaching the ways of God, the character of God, and the nature of God to their children to pass on the understanding of who their God was. Yahweh is just and will always deliver the faithful, even if it is in and through the fire, as we saw in Daniel 3. The Hebrew meaning of Joel's name is Yahweh is God, and depending on the dating of the text could be significant, because at the time of this warning, the people may have been guilty of worshiping idols. You see, if it was written in the pre-exilic period, that means they were definitely worshiping idols. And I'm talking about the Judean exile. We believe that this was written after the Israel exile in 722, and I'll bring that up in just a minute. First, we want to, when we're looking at scriptures, to kind of place things in history and in context. We have to look carefully at what is being said. The text here in Joel opens with the qualification that this is a message that comes directly from the Lord. This type of message was known as an oracle. The word of the Lord that came to Joel is what it says and how it reads. The role of a prophet was to be taken very seriously because it was considered to be a direct message from Yah himself. The writings of Moses in Deuteronomy set the standard for prophets. They were to deliver only the message that Yahweh had given to them, not anything more or anything less. One of these directives, well, one comes from Deuteronomy 18, which is the prophets would have been very familiar with, so would the religious leaders. The other one would come from Ezekiel 3 and other passages, but I'm going to read Ezekiel 3, verses 16 through 19 for you, because this is what God showed me when he had me step up against a very liberal, heretical educational institution where our children just happened to be going. They claimed to be Christian, yet they lived like the rest of the pagan world around them, and they taught like the pagan world around them. And when it was really bad is when I found out that they were teaching these young people from kindergarten on up to 12th grade that there were no absolute morals. Well, we know that God is an absolute God, and he is the anchor of morality. And if he's not, you're living like the rest of the world. Anyhow, when I didn't want to step up to the plate, God began to show me different scriptures that I hadn't really paid attention to before. And this was one of them. This is out of Ezekiel. At the end of 7 days, the word of the Lord came to me. Son of man, I have made you a watchman for the people of Israel. So hear the word I speak and give them a warning from me. When I say to a wicked person, you will surely die, and you do not warn them or speak out to dissuade them from their evil ways, in order to save their life, that wicked person will die for their sin, and I will hold you accountable for their blood. But if you do warn the wicked person, and they do not turn from their wickedness or from their evil ways, they will die for their sin, but you will have saved yourself. That's serious. A prophet or a messenger of God is not supposed to say more or less. And if you do, trust me, it will come back and hit you in the face. I did it once. Years later, after years and years of bringing up these problems to the administration, I misunderstood something going on. And so I stood up and spoke up, and it came and hit me in the face because I did not ask God first, what should I do, Lord? I just thought, well, he's used me before many times, and I need to say something. Well, I was wrong. So it's very important not to say anything more or anything less. So let's move on to dating and interpreting. Scholars have debated as to when Joel was sent to deliver his message to the people. It is difficult to date his message since there are few historical references to go by in his writing. To begin with, there are no kings or other leaders from history mentioned, and some consider this to be because it was written while the people of Judea were in exile, or at some point just after. This would have been 586 BC. There is mention, however, of temple worship, which could indicate a pre-exilic writing, which would have been before 587 up to 586. So it could have been pre-exilic. See, many scholars are comfortable with dating this writing at some time after the northern kingdom of Israel was taken by the Assyrians in 722 BC. Since there is no mention of either Israel or Samaria in his warning, so that makes sense. Now, some people place Joel's message in the post-exilic era and believe that the temple worship that is mentioned is perhaps the second temple period. Still others place this warning in the Persian period, around 400 to 350 BC, because there is a mention of the Ionians in chapter 4. These were Greek inhabitants from Ionia, which is in Western Asia Minor, known today as Turkey. The writing of Joel is famous for its mention of locusts, destruction, and the pouring out of God's Spirit in the last days. Scholars have long debated whether the locusts mentioned were insects or a foreign adversary. It is possible that both are correct. The book of Amos described events that would have affected the agricultural crops, which were at the center of their prosperity and livelihood. It is also possible, we know, that God would use Judah's foreign enemies to cause destruction and disruption in order to judge his people. Some Jewish scholars claim that there are 4 different types of locusts mentioned, and they would represent the 4 nations that would eventually rule over the land: the Babylonians, the Persians, the Greeks, and finally the Romans. It's possible, either way, as Yahweh is sovereign over all things, and he can allow for crop destruction by way of insects, and he can choose to lift his hand of protection over Judah to allow for their enemies to overcome them. Judgment would come from both angles, and it could come from both angles. Joel's message lets the people know that judgment would be harsh, but temporary. Joel would have been read from an apocalyptic perspective that was familiar to other end-of-the-age prophetic books in the Old Testament, like Daniel and Zechariah. They have the same tone to them. So it's very possible, because of the way it's written, that it was written around that time or just after. But people were thinking apocalyptically in those days. They were thinking of last days. Many of you might be thinking of last days with what we're going through in the 21st century, in the year of 2025, especially after what we went through for the past, 8 years, 2020, and how violent things were on the streets. Our writings today are probably a little bit different than they were in the 50s. I don't know. We'd have to go look. We'd have to focus on what Christians at that time were writing about, the people of God. Anyhow, this is the intro to Joel. Next will be chapter 1, and we will work our way through the entire book. And our purpose is to always to get to know God, his nature and his character. So I'm so glad that you're here to join me in this adventure, and we can talk about this beautiful picture that God presents of himself and that we get to know. Until next time, I'm Kathryn Camp, and this is the Faith and Culture Bible Commentary series. I do have a Substack at Living Into the Truth Ministries or Lit Ministries. You can find me on X, and you can find these shows on the different platforms, YouTube and Rumble, and sometimes Brighteon. So look it up, subscribe to my newsletter, visit the website, and I'll see you next time.